This happened a few years ago, back in the fall of 2018. I was living in the city at the time, completely burned out by work and desperate for a break. I was a pretty experienced camper, so I decided to spend a weekend alone in a national forest a few hours' drive away. I picked a designated campsite, but it was remote, no one else for miles around. It was exactly what I wanted, total peace and quiet. On Friday afternoon, I parked my car and hiked about a mile with my gear to the site. It was perfect, a small clearing surrounded by tall pine trees. I expertly pitched my tent, arranged my sleeping bag, and then used my portable stove to boil water for a cup of instant coffee. As the sun set, the sky turned a deep purple and the air was crisp and clean. I sat in my folding chair, sipping my coffee and listening to the wind in the treetops, feeling like the weight of the world had lifted from my shoulders. I slept well that night. The only sounds were the distant howls of a few coyotes. The next morning, when I woke up, subtle things started to feel off. I distinctly remember placing my lighter on a flat rock outside my tent before I went to sleep, right next to my coffee mug. But now it was 3 feet away next to my backpack. I frowned, figuring I must have misremembered where I put it. I didn't think much of it and went about my day, hiking, reading, and enjoying the solitude. The real disturbance began around dusk. I was getting ready to build a fire for dinner when I heard the distinct snap of a twig in the woods not far behind me. I immediately froze and listened. A forest is full of sounds, but this one, it felt intentional. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other wildlife. I waited for a few minutes, and when nothing else happened, I shrugged and went back to what I was doing. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. After it got completely dark, I was sitting by the campfire, able to see only the small circle illuminated by the flames. Beyond the firelight was a deep, impenetrable darkness. That's when I heard it again. Not a twig this time, but footsteps. Heavy, slow, and definitely two-legged. They were moving along the edge of my campsite, always staying in the darkness, just outside my range of vision. I grabbed my large flashlight, its heavy metal casing giving me a small measure of comfort. "Is someone there?" I called out, trying to make my voice sound confident. No response, just the crackling of the fire. The footsteps stopped. I swept the beam of my flashlight through the trees, the light cutting through the darkness, but I saw nothing but tree trunks and bushes. I started to think I was getting paranoid. Maybe it was just the wind and my imagination playing tricks on me. I decided to turn in early, zipping up my tent in the hopes of shutting out the growing sense of unease. I had been lying in my sleeping bag for about an hour, forcing myself to calm down, when I heard the sound. A low, raspy cough right outside my tent. It was so close it made the hair on my arms stand up. Fear washed over me like ice water. I froze, holding my breath. This wasn't an animal, and it wasn't my imagination. There was someone out there. Then, I heard the faint, metallic scrape of my tent's zipper. Someone outside was trying to open it, very, very slowly. My mind went blank, filled with nothing but pure primal fear. I snapped out of my terror in an instant. I couldn't just sit here. I quietly slipped out of my sleeping bag, my hand gripping the heavy metal flashlight. The zipper continued its ascent, bit by bit, making a grating, torturously slow sound. The moment the zipper opened a small gap, I acted. I swung the flashlight with all my strength toward that opening. I heard a grunt of pain, followed by a muffled curse. A hand in a leather glove retracted from the gap. I knew I only had seconds. I didn't try for the door. Instead, I pulled out the camping knife clipped to my belt and frantically slashed at the back wall of the tent. The nylon fabric ripped, and I scrambled out, plunging into the cold night. I ran for my life, with no sense of direction. Branches whipped at my face, and the cold air burned my lungs. I could hear someone chasing me from behind, their footsteps heavy and angry. I didn't dare look back, I just kept running. After who knows how long, my foot slipped, and I tumbled down a steep embankment, landing hard. I glanced up, and my heart nearly stopped. On the ridge above, my pursuer's headlamp switched on. Then next to it, a second headlamp switched on. It wasn't one person. It was two of them, coordinating their search, sweeping their beams across the area where I had just fallen. It was only then that I understood. This wasn't a random encounter. This was planned. The moved lighter, the probing footsteps, they had been watching me, waiting for me to fall asleep. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the sharp pain in my ankle, and continued to stumble through the darkness. I don't know how I did it, but I eventually burst out of the woods and onto the dirt road where I had parked my car. A truck happened to be passing by, and the driver, seeing me waving frantically, mercifully stopped. I incoherently explained what happened, and he called the police immediately. The police later went back to my campsite. The tent was completely shredded, my belongings ransacked. They also found that all 4 of my car's tires had been slashed. They had planned to trap me there. But the thing that chills me to the bone to this day is what they found next to my slashed tent. A pack of new, unopened zip ties. I don't know who they were or what they wanted with me, but I know that if I had reacted a second slower that night, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. I've never been camping again. Some peace and quiet costs too much. This happened about 3 years ago, when my friend Mark and I had just graduated from college, brimming with that mix of excitement and uncertainty about the future. To give ourselves a break, and to properly unwind before diving into the grind, we decided to go camping in a remote site in northern Arizona. We'd heard the scenery there was great, and that it was pretty isolated, so we figured it would be the perfect place to escape the city noise and enjoy a few days of pure tranquility. When we arrived at the campsite, dusk was already settling in. Just as we'd hoped, the place was eerily quiet. Besides our old Honda Civic, the parking lot only had a few ancient-looking RVs, scattered far apart at the edge of the camp. They looked like they'd been there for ages. We quickly set up our tent, then started building a fire, planning to grill some meat and crack open a few cold beers to celebrate our freedom. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the crackle of the burning wood made everything feel just perfect. As evening approached, we were busy clearing some weeds around the fire pit. Mark was splitting wood into smaller pieces while I was adding kindling to the flames. That's when a man suddenly emerged from the thick bushes behind our campsite. He appeared out of nowhere, as if he'd materialized from thin air. He wore a tattered camouflage outfit and carried a huge, bulging backpack. His face was caked with dirt, making it impossible to read his expression, but his eyes, peering out from beneath the grime, were disturbingly deep. He didn't speak or move, just stared at us. There was no warmth, no curiosity in his gaze, just a cold, detached scrutiny. My heart instantly dropped, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I felt like something invisible was intently watching me. Mark, being the more outgoing one, paused for a moment but quickly regained his composure. He managed a smile and called out, "Hey buddy, are you okay? Need any help?" The man simply shook his head slowly, stiffly, without making a sound. Then he started walking very slowly towards us. His steps were strange, deliberate, as if each one was carefully calculated, or like a predator stealthily closing in on its prey. He walked over to a large rock not far from our campfire and just sat down. He didn't greet us, didn't even look at us again. He just sat there, rigid like a statue, but his presence was incredibly strong, a silent weight that made it hard to breathe. We kept grilling our meat, pretending everything was normal, but the atmosphere had become incredibly tense. The man sat there motionless, not a sound from him, not even the rustle of his clothes, as if he'd merged with the surrounding darkness. Every time I snuck a glance at him, he was in the exact same position, his eyes staring blankly ahead. I tried to break the silence, offering him a bottle of water, trying to sound casual. "Thirsty? Want some water?" He merely glanced at the bottle in my hand, but didn't take it, didn't acknowledge me at all. Being ignored like that only made me more uneasy. Mark clearly sensed that something was off too. Our voices grew quieter and quieter, until we were practically whispering. We debated whether we should just leave, but then worried it would be too obvious and might provoke him. A nameless dread began to spread, and I even caught a faint, strange smell from him. a mix of dirt and sweat, with a hint of something decaying. It was like something old and foul. I started to wonder if he was mentally unwell, but I didn't dare make any sudden moves, terrified of accidentally striking a nerve. Night fell completely, and the temperature dropped sharply, but we kept our campfire burning brightly. The man remained seated, seemingly unaffected by the cold, like a block of ice, devoid of life. Just when we thought he'd sit there all night, he suddenly stood up. His movements were slow, but each step carried an overwhelming sense of pressure, like a moving mountain. He walked over to the campfire and squatted down. Then, he reached out his dirty hands, nails caked with mud. Without a word, without asking, without even looking at us, he simply grabbed a piece of our cooked meat, shoved it into his mouth, chewed a few times, and stared at us, a chilling, unsettling smile creeping onto his lips. It wasn't a friendly smile, or even one of satisfaction, but a cold, cruel smirk, the grin of a predator enjoying its kill. I noticed a metallic glint from the side of his backpack, like a sharp tool of some kind. In that moment, I felt like we were trapped in a beast's den, and we were its dinner. The man's eerie smile, coupled with the repulsive sound of him chewing the meat, pierced through any composure I had left, like a cold needle. Fear, pure, primal fear, coursed through my veins. I glanced at Mark. His face was pale, his eyes wide with the same terror I felt. We both sprang up almost simultaneously, without a word, driven by sheer instinct. I grabbed the fire extinguisher that was nearby, its cold metal offering a semblance of false comfort, while Mark snatched up our folding shovel, gripping it so tightly his knuckles turned white. The man suddenly let out a low growl, a sound no human should make, more like an enraged animal. He lunged at us with astonishing speed, completely unlike his earlier sluggish movements. I didn't have time to think. I instinctively raised the fire extinguisher and blasted it directly into his face. White powder erupted, instantly obscuring his vision. He grunted in pain, clutching his eyes, and stumbled back a few steps. Mark seized the moment, swinging the shovel and hitting him hard on the shoulder. The man let out a piercing howl of agony, lost his balance, and fell to the ground. We didn't hesitate for a second, didn't even glance back. I yanked Mark by the arm, and we bolted towards our car. The rain had stopped at some point, but the air was thick with a suffocating, almost metallic smell, as if everything that had just happened was a nightmare. I heard the man struggling to get up behind us, but he didn't give chase. I used my trembling hands to insert the key, started the engine, and slammed on the gas. The car lurched forward, leaving the campsite far behind. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and the dark forest seemed to open like a gaping maw, and the man, like a shadow, vanished into the edge of the darkness. We drove straight to the nearest town, and checked into a motel that seemed relatively safe. We called the police, and they came to the campsite, but since there was no actual physical harm and no evidence left behind, the man hadn't even touched our car. There was little they could do beyond taking a report. They simply said that area often had transients or mentally unstable individuals, and advised us to be more careful in the future. But that man's eyes, that eerie smile, and the sound of him chewing the meat still haunt me like a nightmare. I often wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat, with his beastly growl echoing in my ears. We never went back to that campsite, and we rarely go camping in any remote areas anymore. Every time I pass a desolate motel or see a worn-out pickup truck, my heart clenches. I still don't know who that man was, why he did what he did, or if he's still out there, wandering that wilderness, searching for his next target. That sense of the unknown, that fear of being watched again, is more unsettling than any physical wound. That uninvited dinner guest planted a seed in my mind, one that has grown into a deep-seated fear. I can no longer trust strangers or unfamiliar environments with the same innocence I once did. That chilling encounter stole my naivete and my sense of security forever. The solo hiking and camping trip to Big Bear Lake still sends shivers down my spine when I think about it. I'd always loved being alone in the wilderness, the feeling of being completely cut off from everything. Before heading out, I'd meticulously planned my route, checked the weather forecast, and made sure all my gear was in perfect order. The first day went smoothly. I reached my planned campsite, set up my tent, had something to eat, and read a book as the sun went down. It was quiet, just the occasional chirping of insects and the distant rustling of leaves in the wind. As night fell, the forest grew even more silent, deepening its mysterious aura. I crawled into my sleeping bag and drifted off to sleep pretty quickly. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a faint rustling sound. At first, I thought it was just a small animal moving around nearby and didn't pay much attention, rolling over to try and go back to sleep. But the sound continued, intermittently, sometimes far, sometimes near. It didn't sound like an animal. It was more like someone carefully walking, stepping on dried leaves. My heart started to feel a little uneasy, and I strained my ears, listening closely. The wind wasn't strong, and the natural sounds around me were very regular, making those unnatural footsteps stand out clearly. I quietly sat up, peering out through the thin fabric of my tent, but it was pitch black outside, and I couldn't see anything. I turned on my headlamp, hesitated, but didn't dare shine it directly out. It was a strange feeling, like there were eyes watching me in the darkness, and I didn't know who they were or what they wanted. I gripped the bear spray next to me tightly, trying to stay calm. The footsteps got closer and closer. I could even hear faint breathing, right outside my tent. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensed. Suddenly, the tent zipper was gently pulled open. My heart nearly exploded. Adrenaline surged through me instantly. I snatched up the bear spray and sprayed it directly into the opening. A muffled groan came from outside, followed by the sound of a heavy body hitting the ground. I didn't care about being scared. I quickly yanked open the tent and shone my headlamp out. A man in a dark hoodie was on the ground, clutching his face and groaning in pain. He looked tall, and his hood was pulled low, obscuring his face. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stand up and slowly back away. The man struggled to get up, muttering something unintelligibly. I raised the bear spray again and shouted at him, "Don't move. I've already called the police," even though I knew there was no signal out there. He seemed startled by my demeanor and paused his movements. I seized the opportunity, turned and ran, stumbling through the trees in the direction I'd come from. I didn't dare look back, just ran as hard as I could. Branches scratched my skin, and I tripped over roots several times. I could feel that person might still be chasing me. The sheer terror almost suffocated me. I don't know how long I ran until my lungs felt like they were going to burst before I dared to stop and catch my breath. It was still pitch black around me, only the beam of my headlamp swayed. I pulled out my phone, and sure enough, no signal. I knew I had to get out of there as quickly as possible. I forced myself to endure the fear, relying on memory and the faint starlight to find my way back. As dawn approached, I finally saw the sign for the campsite entrance. I stumbled out and flagged down a passing car, asking them to help me call the police. The police arrived quickly. They followed me back to the campsite, but the man was gone. They only found some signs of a struggle near my tent. They took my statement and escorted me back to town. After that, I could never shake off the fear of that night. I didn't know who that person was or what he wanted to do to me. Maybe he was just a lost hiker who got accidentally sprayed, but the way he stealthily approached my tent and his reaction after falling made me feel like it wasn't that simple. I later heard that sometimes unsavory characters appear in the nearby mountains. Since then, I've never gone camping alone in the wilderness again. The fear of an unknown danger approaching in the quiet darkness, like a persistent shadow, forever remains in my memory. I often think of that unzipped tent and the potential eyes in the darkness, and it sends chills down my spine.